The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another rut in the road, jolting Fiona Barrett awake from her fitful slumber. The year was 1875, and the Montana Territory stretched before her like an endless canvas of uncertainty. She clutched her sister's letter tightly in her gloved hand, the paper now worn and creased from countless readings. 3 months had passed since Sarah's death, and now Fiona was traveling west to honor a promise that felt increasingly impossible with each passing mile. The hot summer sun beat down mercilessly as Fiona dabbed at her perspiring forehead with a handkerchief. Her traveling companions, a banker, a missionary, and an elderly woman, had long since given up on conversation, each retreating into their own thoughts as the journey wore on. Fiona's mind drifted back to the letter that had arrived alongside the devastating news of her sister's passing. "Should anything happen to me," Sarah had written, "promise you'll care for Thomas and little Emma. Thomas is a good man, but he'll need a wife to help raise our daughter. You're the only one I'd trust with my family, Fiona." Thomas had written as well, his grief evident in every shaky pen stroke, formally proposing marriage. It was a practical arrangement, common enough in these harsh frontier lands. Yet Fiona couldn't quiet the voice inside her that questioned the propriety of it all, marrying her sister's husband, becoming mother to her niece. "Next stop, White Rock Creek," the driver called down. Fiona gathered her belongings as the stagecoach slowed. White Rock Creek wasn't her final destination. She'd need to catch another coach to Montana City tomorrow, but a night's rest at the local inn would be welcome after days of travel. As the coach rolled to a stop, Fiona caught sight of a tall figure leaning against the hitching post outside the station. His hat was pulled low, but she could make out a strong jawline covered in stubble. When he lifted his head, their eyes met briefly before she looked away, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. The driver opened the door and offered his hand. "Madam, watch your step now." As Fiona descended, her foot caught on her skirt and she stumbled forward. Strong hands caught her before she could fall face first into the dirt. "Easy there," said a deep voice. "These coaches weren't built for graceful exits." Fiona found herself staring up into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. The man who'd caught her stepped back, releasing her arms once she was steady. "Thank you, sir," she said, smoothing her skirts. "Quinn Harrington," he said, tipping his hat. "Heading somewhere particular, Miss Fiona Barrett?" "I'm on my way to Montana City." Something flickered in Quinn's eyes. "Montana City? That's quite a journey for a lady alone." "I have business there," she replied simply. Quinn nodded, though curiosity remained evident in his expression. "As it happens, I'm headed that way myself. The stagecoach won't be leaving until tomorrow, but there's a decent meal to be had at the inn." Fiona hesitated. Her mother had raised her to be wary of overly helpful strangers, particularly men with smiles that came too easily. But there was something reassuring about Quinn Harrington. Perhaps it was the honest directness of his gaze or the respectful distance he maintained. "I'd be grateful for the recommendation," she said carefully. Inside the inn, Fiona secured a room for the night and found herself seated across from Quinn at a corner table. The small dining room bustled with travelers and locals alike. A piano played softly in the corner, competing with the clinking of silverware and murmured conversations. "So what brings you to Montana City?" Quinn asked, cutting into his steak. Fiona hesitated. She'd avoided discussing her purpose with fellow travelers, aware of how it might sound to strangers. "Family matters." Quinn nodded, not pressing further. "I've got a ranch about 20 miles north of town. Been away handling some business in Denver." "You're a rancher, then?" "Among other things," he said with a slight smile. "Used to ride with the cavalry, then tried my hand at tracking outlaws for a spell. Ranching's more peaceful, though sometimes I miss the adventure." Fiona found herself relaxing in his company. Quinn told stories of life in the territory, tales of harsh winters and breathtaking springs, of cattle drives and frontier justice. He spoke with a quiet confidence that Fiona found both intriguing and comforting. As the evening wore on, Quinn seemed to notice her growing fatigue. "You should get some rest, Miss Barrett. The road to Montana City is rough, and tomorrow's journey won't be any easier than today's." "You're right, of course." Fiona stood, gathering her reticule. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Harrington." "Quinn," he corrected with a smile. "Out here, formalities don't last long." "Quinn, then," she replied, returning his smile hesitantly. "Good night." In her small room, Fiona unpinned her hair and changed into her nightgown. As she sat on the edge of the bed, she pulled out Sarah's letter again. The words hadn't changed, but somehow they felt heavier tonight. Perhaps it was meeting Quinn, the first person to show her genuine kindness since beginning her journey, that made her question her path anew. Fiona had never met Thomas Blackwell in person. Sarah had moved west 5 years ago after her marriage, and distance had made visits impossible. All Fiona knew of her brother-in-law came from Sarah's letters, which painted him as hardworking and honorable, if somewhat reserved. Was that enough to build a marriage upon? The practical arrangement that had seemed sensible back in Boston now felt cold and uncertain. Morning came too quickly. Fiona dressed in her plainest traveling dress, secured her hair beneath her bonnet, and joined the other passengers gathering for the next stage of their journey. Quinn was already there, loading his saddle and bags onto the coach. "I thought you might have your own horse," Fiona remarked as she approached. Quinn shook his head. "Left him at a livery in Denver. Didn't want to push him with all the traveling I've been doing." The journey to Montana City would take another full day, and Fiona found herself seated beside Quinn as the coach lurched forward. The closeness of the quarters made conversation inevitable, and as the miles passed, Fiona found herself sharing more than she had intended. "My sister passed 3 months ago," she admitted as they discussed family. "Consumption. She left behind a husband and a 4-year-old daughter." Quinn's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss." Fiona nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you." "Sarah was always the adventurous one. I never imagined she'd go before me. And now you're making the journey she made, in a manner of speaking." Fiona hesitated, then decided honesty would be simpler than evasion. "I'm going to marry her widower." Quinn's eyebrows rose and he studied her face. "That seems wrong," he said bluntly, then immediately looked as if he regretted his words. "Forgive me, that was presumptuous." But Fiona wasn't offended. "It's a practical arrangement," she explained. "Thomas needs someone to help raise Emma and I. I promised Sarah I'd look after her family." "There are other ways to keep that promise without marrying a man you've never met," Quinn observed. "Perhaps. But what options does a single woman have out here? I can't simply move in as the maiden aunt, and Thomas needs a wife." Quinn seemed to consider this. "Out here, survival often trumps propriety," he conceded. "But marriage should be more than survival, shouldn't it?" Fiona had no answer to that. The coach hit a particularly deep rut, sending her lurching against Quinn's shoulder. He steadied her with a hand, and Fiona was acutely aware of his touch even after he withdrew it. As the day wore on, the other passengers dozed or rayed, while Quinn pointed out landmarks to Fiona. He knew the territory well, and his commentary made the harsh landscape come alive with history and significance. "See that ridge? Blackfoot hunting parties used to watch for buffalo herds from there. And over there, that's where the first gold strikes were found that brought folks rushing to this territory." "How long have you been here?" Fiona asked. "Almost 10 years now. Came out after the war with nothing but my horse and what I could carry. A shadow crossed his face. Needed open sky after what I'd seen. Fiona understood without asking that he had fought in the terrible conflict that had torn the nation apart. And you found peace here, most days, Quinn replied with a half-smile. Though peace looks different in the territories than it does back east. By late afternoon, the coach was making its final approach to Montana City. The settlement was larger than Fiona had expected, several streets lined with buildings both wooden and brick, a church steeple rising above the rooftops, and the bustle of commerce evident even from a distance. Thomas's ranch is about 5 miles outside town, Fiona said, anxiety knotting her stomach as the moment of arrival drew near. Quinn's expression was unreadable. You're certain about this? I made a promise, Fiona repeated, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. The stagecoach pulled into town, coming to a stop before the station. Passengers began to disembark, and Fiona found herself reluctant to move. Quinn stepped down first, then turned to offer his hand. As Fiona descended, she noticed a man approaching from across the street. He wore a rancher's clothes, and his face bore the weathered look of someone who spent most days under the sun. Miss Barrett, the man called, removing his hat to reveal thinning brown hair. I'm Thomas Blackwell. Fiona felt Quinn's hand tense beneath hers before he released it. She stepped forward, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Mr. Blackwell, how did you know to meet me today? Telegraph from White Rock Creek mentioned you were on today's coach. Thomas's eyes were tired, the grief still evident in the slump of his shoulders. Welcome to Montana City. An awkward silence fell between them. Thomas made no move to embrace her, for which Fiona was grateful. Instead, he gestured to a wagon parked nearby. I've got the wagon ready. We can head to the ranch now if you're not too tired. Actually, Quinn interjected, surprising Fiona, perhaps Miss Barrett would prefer to rest in town tonight. The journey's been long and tomorrow would be soon enough to make decisions. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he took in Quinn. And you are, Quinn Harrington. Met Miss Barrett on the journey. I own the Double H north of town. Recognition flickered in Thomas's eyes. Harrington, heard of you. He turned back to Fiona. Is that what you want, to stay in town tonight? Fiona felt caught between the two men. Thomas was practically a stranger despite being her future husband. Quinn was also a stranger, yet somehow felt less so after their shared journey. The thought of immediately departing for an isolated ranch with Thomas filled her with unexpected dread. I think I would prefer to rest tonight, she admitted, if that's acceptable to you. Thomas nodded stiffly. Of course. The Montana house has clean rooms. I'll come for you tomorrow morning. He hesitated, then added, Emma's looking forward to meeting you. The mention of her niece softened Fiona's anxiety slightly. And her. Please tell her I've brought a present. After arrangements were made for the morning, Thomas departed, leaving Fiona standing with her luggage beside Quinn. Thank you, she said quietly. Quinn nodded. Seemed like you needed a moment to breathe. He seems reserved. Grief does that to a man, Quinn replied, though something in his tone suggested he was withholding judgment. Come on, I'll walk you to the hotel. The Montana house was a 3-story building with aspirations of Eastern elegance that didn't quite succeed. Still, the lobby was clean and the clerk polite as Fiona checked in. Quinn carried her bags to her room, setting them just inside the door. I'll be staying here tonight as well, he said. If you'd care for company at dinner, I'll be downstairs at 6. Fiona knew she should decline. She was practically engaged, and dining alone with another man would be improper. Yet the thought of spending the evening alone with her anxious thoughts was unbearable. I would appreciate the company, she said. When Quinn departed, Fiona sank onto the bed. emotions overwhelming her. She had expected to feel relief upon reaching her destination, but instead found only growing uncertainty. Thomas Blackwell seemed decent enough, but there had been no spark of connection, not even the comfort of familiarity. He was a stranger who would become her husband, and the reality of that was far more daunting than the abstract idea had been. At dinner, Fiona found Quinn waiting in the hotel's small dining room. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, his hair neatly combed and his clothes free of travel dust. Something warmed inside her at the sight of him. "You look like you're having second thoughts," Quinn observed as they sat down. Fiona sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been watching." He studied her face. "What's really bringing you to marry a man you've never met, Fiona? It can't just be a promise to your sister." The directness of his question caught her off guard. "I have few prospects in Boston," she admitted after a pause. "My parents are gone, I have no fortune, and I've spent years caring for elderly relatives who no longer need me." Sarah's letter offered purpose. "And that's enough for you, purpose?" "What more should I expect?" Fiona asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Love." "At my age, with my circumstances." "How old are you?" Quinn asked, clearly puzzled. 26, Quinn laughed, surprising her. "Hardly ancient, Miss Barrett." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "Old enough to be considered firmly on the shelf back east." "Well, you're not back east anymore," Quinn replied, his eyes holding hers. "Out here, people get second chances, even third and fourth ones if they're brave enough to take them." There was something in his gaze that made Fiona's heart beat faster. She looked away, reaching for her water glass. "Tell me more about your ranch," she said, deliberately changing the subject. Quinn allowed the diversion, describing the land he'd built up over the years, the cattle operation, the horses he bred, the small but comfortable house he'd constructed with his own hands. As he spoke, Fiona could picture it all and found herself wondering what life might be like in such a place. "It's not fancy," Quinn concluded, "but it's mine, free and clear. Took years of hard work, but there's a satisfaction in that." "It sounds wonderful," Fiona said sincerely. "You should see it sometime," Quinn replied, then seemed to catch himself. "Though I suppose your new life will keep you busy." The reminder of her impending marriage cast a shadow over their conversation. They finished their meal discussing safer topics, the town's history, the changing seasons in Montana, the latest news from the East. Yet underneath ran a current of awareness that Fiona couldn't ignore. When they parted at her door, Quinn paused longer than necessary. "Fiona," he began, then stopped, conflict evident in his expression. "Yes." "Nothing," he said finally. "Sleep well. I'll see you in the morning before you go." Alone in her room, Fiona stood at the window, looking out at the main street of Montana City. Lamps were being lit in windows, and the saloon across the way glowed with activity. This would be her home now, or near enough. She would live on Thomas's ranch, raise her sister's daughter, be a wife to a man who loved another woman. It was what she had agreed to, what she had traveled so far to do. Yet in just 2 days, Quinn Harrington had awakened questions she hadn't thought to ask, feelings she hadn't expected to have. It was foolish, she knew. A brief connection on a stagecoach journey wasn't reason enough to question decisions that would affect the rest of her life. Morning came with no more clarity than night had offered. Fiona dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a deep blue that Sarah had always said brought out her eyes. She packed her remaining belongings and went downstairs to breakfast, where she found Quinn already seated. "You look lovely," he said simply as she joined him. "Thank you." Fiona fidgeted with her napkin. "Thomas will be here at 9. Quinn nodded, something unspoken in his eyes. They ate in companionable silence, the weight of her imminent departure hanging between them. As 9 o'clock approached, Quinn walked with Fiona to the hotel entrance. Outside, Thomas's wagon was already waiting, the man himself standing beside it. "This is where we part ways, it seems," Quinn said, his voice low. "Yes." Fiona found herself unable to say more. Quinn took her hand, and for a wild moment, Fiona thought he might kiss it. Instead, he pressed something into her palm. "If you need anything at all, send word to the Double H." Fiona looked down to see a small carved wooden horse. "It's beautiful." "Just a trinket," Quinn said with a shrug. "Something to remember Montana by, whatever you decide." Before Fiona could respond, Thomas approached, nodding stiffly to Quinn. "Harrington, Blackwell." Quinn stepped back, releasing Fiona's hand. "Take good care of Miss Barrett. That's the plan." Thomas turned to Fiona. "Ready to go? Emma's eager to meet you." Fiona tucked the wooden horse into her pocket and nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." The ride to the Blackwell ranch was largely silent. Thomas wasn't much for conversation, it seemed, answering Fiona's questions about the property and his daughter in short, direct sentences that didn't invite further discussion. The landscape was beautiful in its rugged way, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the autumn grass golden in the morning sun. "Sarah loved this view," Thomas said suddenly, as they crested a hill. "Said it was worth all the hardships just to wake up to this every day." It was the first time he'd mentioned Sarah without prompting, and Fiona seized the opening. "She wrote about it in her letters. She was very happy here with you." Thomas's hands tightened on the reins. "We had a good life. Short, but good." "I know I can never replace her, no," Thomas cut in, his voice rough. "You can't, and I wouldn't ask you to try." He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "This arrangement, it's practical. Emma needs a mother and I need help running the household. Sarah thought highly of you. Said you were sensible, good with children." "I see." Fiona tried to hide her hurt at his bluntness. This was, after all, exactly what she had agreed to, a practical arrangement, not a love match. Why, then, did it sting to hear it stated so plainly? The Blackwell Ranch came into view, a modest house with a barn and several outbuildings, a corral holding a few horses, and a small garden that had seen better days. It was tidy, but showed signs of neglect that spoke of a household missing its mistress. As they pulled up to the house, the door burst open and a small figure came running out. Emma Blackwell had her mother's golden curls and her father's solemn eyes, an enchanting combination in her little face. "Papa, is that her? Is that Aunt Fiona?" she called, bouncing with excitement. Thomas's expression transformed at the sight of his daughter, genuine warmth replacing his reserve. "Yes, sweetheart, this is your Aunt Fiona." Fiona barely had time to descend from the wagon before Emma was upon her, wrapping small arms around her waist. "Mama said you would come if I needed you," the child said, looking up with a smile that was painfully reminiscent of Sarah's. "And you did." Tears pricked Fiona's eyes as she knelt to embrace her niece properly. "Of course I did. I've been so looking forward to meeting you." Emma pulled back, studying Fiona's face with childish directness. "You don't look like Mama except your eyes." She had blue eyes, too. "Yes, we got those from our grandmother," Fiona said, smiling through her emotion. "I brought you something from Boston. Would you like to see?" Emma nodded eagerly, and Fiona retrieved a package from her luggage, a beautifully illustrated book of fairy tales she'd selected knowing how Sarah had loved such stories as a child. "It's beautiful," Emma exclaimed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Will you read it to me?" "I'd love to," Fiona promised. "Every night if you'd like." Thomas watched their interaction with evident relief. "Emma, why don't you show Miss Barrett Aunt Fiona to her room while I bring in her things?" The room Emma led her to was clearly Sarah's. A few personal items still remained, though most had been cleared away. A quilt Fiona recognized from their childhood lay folded at the foot of the bed. The sight of it brought a fresh wave of grief. "Papa sleeps in the room down the hall now," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "He said it was too sad to stay in here after Mama went to heaven." Fiona nodded, unsure how to respond to the child's innocent revelation. "Are you going to be my new mama?" Emma asked suddenly. The directness of the question caught Fiona off guard. Well, yes, in a way. Your father and I are planning to marry." Emma considered this solemnly. "Papa says no one could replace Mama, but he said you'd be good to me because you're Mama's sister." "That's right," Fiona said gently. "I loved your Mama very much, and I already love you too. But you don't love Papa yet." The perception of children was sometimes startling. "I don't know your Papa very well yet," Fiona answered carefully. "But we both love you, and that's a good place to start, don't you think?" Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "Can we read my new book now?" Grateful for the diversion, Fiona agreed, and they settled on the bed together. Emma curled against her side as Fiona read tales of princesses and dragons, knights and fairies. It was in this tableau that Thomas found them later, pausing in the doorway with an unreadable expression. "Emma's missed having stories," he said. "I'm not much good at reading aloud." "Papa falls asleep," Emma confided with a giggle. Thomas's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Supper will be ready soon. Mrs. Jenkins from the neighboring farm has been cooking for us, but she'll be leaving now that you're here." The implication was clear. Fiona would be taking over the household duties immediately. "I'll be happy to help, though I should warn you my cooking skills are limited." "You'll learn," Thomas said with a shrug. "Everyone does out here." That evening, after Emma was tucked into bed, Fiona found herself alone with Thomas on the small porch. The night was cool, stars blazing overhead in numbers Fiona had never seen in Boston. "When did you want to have the wedding?" Thomas asked abruptly, breaking the silence. Fiona's heart skipped uncomfortably. "I hadn't thought. I assumed you would have preferences." "Sooner is better than later for Emma's sake, and people will talk if we delay too long." Thomas wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. "The circuit preacher comes through in 2 weeks. Would that suit? 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare herself to marry this stranger." "If you think that's best," Fiona replied, her voice smaller than she intended. Thomas finally turned to her. In the dim light from the window, his face was shadowed, but she could feel his assessment. "You're having doubts," he stated, "aren't you?" Fiona countered, surprising herself with her boldness. A long silence followed. "Every day," Thomas admitted finally, "but Emma needs stability, and I promised Sarah I'd look after you if you came." The revelation startled Fiona. "You promised to look after me," Thomas nodded. "Sarah worried about you being alone. She made me promise that if you came west, I'd make sure you were provided for." Fiona wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "So we're both fulfilling promises to Sarah. Seems that way." Thomas sighed heavily. "I won't force this, Fiona." "If you want to return to Boston, no," Fiona interrupted. "I made my choice, and Emma." She thought of the little girl's eager acceptance, her innocent questions. Emma deserves stability. Thomas studied her a moment longer, then nodded. 2 weeks, then." The days that followed established a routine of sorts. Fiona took charge of the household, learning from Mrs. Jenkins before the woman departed. She spent time with Emma, reading stories and teaching her the simple needlework Sarah and she had learned as girls. Thomas worked from dawn till dusk, returning for meals but otherwise keeping his distance. It wasn't an unhappy existence. Emma was a delightful child, intelligent and affectionate. The ranch work was challenging but satisfying in its way. Yet Fiona couldn't shake the feeling that something essential was missing, that she was preparing to settle for a half-life, a pale imitation of what might have been. A week after her arrival, Thomas announced at breakfast that he needed supplies from town. "Would you and Emma like to come along? Might do you good to see more of Montana City." Fiona agreed readily, eager for a change of scenery and perhaps the chance to post a letter to her friend in Boston. Emma was thrilled at the prospect of an outing, chattering excitedly as they prepared to leave. Montana City was busy with the day's commerce when they arrived. Thomas had business at the bank and the mercantile, leaving Fiona and Emma to explore the small Main Street. They visited the confectionery, where Emma selected a peppermint stick with serious deliberation, and then the general store, where Fiona purchased thread and fabric for new curtains. As they emerged from the store, Fiona collided with someone entering. "I beg your pardon," she began, then stopped short. Quinn Harrington looked as surprised as she felt. "Fiona, and this must be Emma." He knelt to the child's level. "Hello, Miss Emma. I'm Quinn Harrington, a friend of your aunt's." Emma studied him with interest. "You're very tall," she declared. Quinn laughed. "That I am. Some might say too tall for my own good." He stood, turning his attention back to Fiona. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough," Fiona replied, acutely aware of how much she'd missed his easy conversation. "We're in town for supplies." "Papa's at the bank," Emma added helpfully. "He said we could look at the store while he finished business." Quinn's expression flickered briefly. "I see. And when is the wedding to be?" "Next Sunday," Fiona answered. "The circuit preacher will be in town." Quinn nodded, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "Well, I wish you both happiness. Mr. Harrington," Emma tugged at his sleeve, "do you have horses? Papa says the best horses come from the Double H Ranch." "I do indeed have horses," Quinn replied, smiling at the child. "Some of the finest in the territory, if I say so myself. Can I see them sometime?" Emma's eyes were wide with hope. Quinn glanced at Fiona before answering. "That would be up to your papa and Aunt Fiona." "Perhaps someday," Fiona said, not wanting to disappoint Emma but aware of the awkwardness of the situation. "Actually," Quinn said, straightening his hat, "I've been meaning to talk to your father about a business matter. I might just, Harrington." Thomas's voice cut through the conversation as he approached from the direction of the bank. "Didn't expect to see you in town." "Blackwell." Quinn nodded in greeting. "Just picking up some supplies. Met your daughter and Miss Barrett here." Thomas's gaze moved between Fiona and Quinn, his expression guarded. "I see. Mr. Harrington has horses, Papa," Emma exclaimed. "Can we go see them?" Thomas frowned slightly. "That's not actually," Quinn interjected smoothly. "I was hoping to discuss business with you. I'm looking to expand my herd, and I heard you might be selling some of your grazing land to the north." Thomas's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's true enough. Didn't know you were in the market." "Why don't we discuss it over lunch?" Quinn suggested. "My treat." "I'm sure Miss Barrett and Emma would enjoy a meal at the hotel." Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "I suppose we could do that." The hotel dining room was nearly empty at this hour, and they were seated at a large table by the window. Emma was delighted by the novelty, and even Thomas seemed to relax as Quinn engaged him in talk of cattle prices and land values. Fiona found herself watching Quinn the way he included Emma in the conversation, his respectful attention to Thomas's opinions, the occasional glance he sent her way when the others weren't looking. "How many acres were you thinking of selling?" Quinn asked, as their meal was served. "About 200, Thomas replied. "The northern section that borders Willow Creek, good water access, decent grazing." "I know the piece," Quinn nodded. "It would connect nicely to my southeastern pasture. What price were you considering?" As the men discussed figures, Emma tugged at Fiona's sleeve. "I like Mr. Harrington," she whispered. "He smiles with his eyes like Mama used to." Fiona felt a pang in her heart. "Yes, he does. Papa never smiles with his eyes anymore," Emma continued in her stage whisper. "Not since Mama went away." Fiona glanced at Thomas, wondering if he'd heard, but he was focused on his conversation with Quinn. "It's hard for your papa," she explained softly. "He misses your mama very much." "Will he be happy again when you get married?" Emma asked. The innocent question struck Fiona like a physical blow. Would either of them find happiness in their arranged marriage, or would they merely be going through the motions, two people bound by a promise to someone who was gone? "I hope so," Fiona replied, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. After lunch, Quinn suggested they all ride out to look at the land in question. "I've got my horse and we could rent a buckboard for the rest of you. Might as well see the property while we're discussing it." Thomas agreed, and soon they were heading out of town, Quinn riding alongside the buckboard where Thomas, Fiona, and Emma sat. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch forever. Fiona found herself breathing more easily than she had in days, the open country working its magic on her city-bred senses. "It's beautiful here," she remarked as they passed a stand of aspen trees, their leaves golden in the sunlight. "Wait till you see it in spring," Quinn replied. "When the wildflowers bloom, it's like God spilled his paint box across the hills." They reached the parcel of land Thomas was considering selling, a gently sloping meadow that ran down to a clear, fast-running creek. Quinn dismounted, walking the property with Thomas while Fiona and Emma remained with the buckboard. "Can I wade in the creek, Aunt Fiona?" Emma asked eagerly. Fiona hesitated. "I'm not sure your father would approve." "Please, just my feet. Mama used to let me." Unable to resist the appeal, Fiona helped Emma remove her shoes and stockings, then walked her to the creek's edge where the water ran shallow over smooth stones. Emma squealed with delight at the cold water, splashing happily while Fiona held her hand. Across the meadow, Fiona could see Quinn and Thomas deep in conversation, occasionally gesturing at the landscape around them. There was something about Quinn in this setting, confident, knowledgeable, at home in the wild country, that made her heart ache with a longing she dared not name. "I think they're coming back," Fiona said to Emma after several minutes. "We should get your feet dried off." By the time Quinn and Thomas returned, Emma was properly shod again, though her cheeks were flushed with excitement from her adventure. "Papa, the water was so cold," she exclaimed. "Aunt Fiona let me put my feet in." Thomas glanced at Fiona with raised eyebrows but didn't comment on the impromptu paddling. "We've come to an agreement," he said instead. "Quinn will buy the northern parcel. We'll draw up the papers in town next week," Quinn added. "Good deal for both of us, I think." The ride back to town was more animated, with Emma chattering about the creek and the birds they'd seen, and Thomas engaged in continued discussion with Quinn about mutual acquaintances and local affairs. Fiona remained quiet, watching the interaction and wondering at the change in Thomas. He seemed almost at ease with Quinn, more talkative than she'd seen him since her arrival. In town, Quinn helped them load their supplies into Thomas's wagon. "I'll see you next week to finalize the sale," he said to Thomas, then turned to Emma. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Emma. Perhaps you can come see the horses sometime after all." Emma beamed. "Yes, please." Quinn's eyes finally met Fiona's. "Miss Barrett, take care." "You as well, Mr. Harrington." As they drove away, Fiona was conscious of Quinn standing in the street, watching them go. She resisted the urge to look back, though her awareness of his presence lingered long after they'd left town behind. "Harrington's a good man," Thomas said unexpectedly as they neared the ranch. Honest dealer. Fought in the war, I hear. Yes, he mentioned that, Fiona replied, surprised at Thomas's volunteered opinion. Emma seems to have taken a shine to him. Thomas glanced at his daughter, who had fallen asleep against Fiona's side. She doesn't warm up to many folks these days. Fiona wasn't sure how to respond. He was very kind to us on the journey from White Rock Creek. Thomas nodded, then fell silent again. It wasn't until they were unloading the wagon at the ranch that he spoke again. The wedding, he began, then paused as if collecting his thoughts. I've been thinking maybe we should postpone. Fiona's heart skipped a beat. Postpone? May I ask why? Thomas set down a sack of flour, looking uncomfortable. It's just, I'm not sure this is right, Fiona, for either of us. Because of Sarah? Fiona asked gently. Partly. Thomas rubbed his neck, clearly struggling to articulate his thoughts. But also because I see the way you look at Harrington. Fiona felt her cheeks flame. It's all right, Thomas interrupted. I'm not angry. In fact, it's made me realize something. He sighed heavily. I'm not ready to marry anyone, Fiona, not even for Emma's sake. It wouldn't be fair to you or to me. Relief and confusion warred within Fiona. But what about Emma? Your promise to Sarah? Emma needs someone who loves her, that's true, but she doesn't need us to be married for that. Thomas met her gaze directly. You could stay on as Emma's aunt, help with the household. I'd pay you a fair wage, but we'd both be free to find our own paths. The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. You're sure about this? Thomas nodded. I've been thinking about it since we ran into Harrington today. The way you two are together, it reminded me of how Sarah and I were. A sad smile crossed his face. I don't want either of us settling for less than that. That night, lying in Sarah's bed, Fiona felt as if a weight had been lifted. She wasn't to be Thomas's wife after all. The knowledge should have left her adrift, her purpose in coming west suddenly unclear. Instead, she felt a curious lightness, a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. The wooden horse Quinn had given her sat on the bedside table, a reminder of choices not yet made. Fiona picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth carving. What would Quinn say if he knew the wedding was off? Would it matter to him? His interest in her might have been merely kindness to a fellow traveler, nothing more. Yet she couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her, the connection she'd felt in his company. For the first time in years, Fiona allowed herself to hope for something more than duty and obligation. Perhaps, just perhaps, the Montana Territory held a different future for her than the one she'd imagined. The next week passed in a curious state of limbo. Thomas and Fiona settled into a new understanding she would stay on as Emma's aunt and helper, with her own small bedroom being prepared in what had been the sewing room. The news that the wedding was off would be shared when Thomas went to town to finalize the land sale with Quinn. Emma, surprisingly, took the news in stride. So you'll still be my aunt but not my new mama, she clarified. That's right, Fiona explained. I'll still live here and take care of you, but your papa and I won't be getting married. Emma considered this. Will you still read me stories every night? Of course I will. Then it's all right, Emma decided with childish simplicity. And maybe we can still go see Mr. Harrington's horses sometime. Fiona smiled, touched by the child's acceptance. Maybe we can. On the day Thomas was to meet Quinn in town, Fiona found herself unusually nervous. She took extra care with her appearance, though she told herself it was merely to look presentable for town, not because she might see Quinn again. You should come along, Thomas suggested at breakfast. I'll be tied up with the lawyer for a while. You and Emma could visit the lending library Mrs. Peterson just opened. Fiona agreed, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the prospect. They set out after the morning chores were done. the wagon loaded with eggs and butter to trade at the general store. Montana City was busy with its usual activity when they arrived. Thomas dropped Fiona and Emma at the library before heading to the lawyer's office where he was to meet Quinn. The library was a small but well-appointed room attached to Mrs. Peterson's home. The widow had apparently brought a substantial collection of books west with her, and had decided to share them with the town's residents through a lending system. "One book at a time," she explained to Emma, who was wide-eyed at the shelves of volumes. "And it must be returned within 2 weeks, clean and undamaged." While Emma deliberated over her selection with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence, Fiona browsed the adult section. She was examining a volume of Tennyson's poems when the library door opened, and Quinn stepped in. "Mrs. Peterson said I might find you here," he said, removing his hat as he approached. Fiona's heart quickened at the sight of him. "Quinn, I thought you were meeting with Thomas." "Just finished," he replied. "The sale is complete. Thomas mentioned he needed to stop by the mercantile, so I offered to escort you and Emma while he finishes his business." "That was thoughtful of you." Fiona replaced the book on the shelf, suddenly conscious of her flushed cheeks. "I had an ulterior motive," Quinn admitted, lowering his voice. "Thomas told me about the wedding being called off." Fiona nodded, unable to read his expression. "Yes, we decided it wasn't the right choice for either of us." "And how do you feel about that decision?" Quinn asked, his blue eyes intent on hers. Before Fiona could answer, Emma came bounding over, a book clutched to her chest. "Mr. Harrington, look what I found, a book about horses." Quinn knelt to examine her selection. "An excellent choice, Miss Emma. Are you interested in horses?" "Yes. Papa says I can learn to ride properly next spring when I'm bigger." Emma looked up at him hopefully. "Can I still come see your horses sometime?" "If your papa and Aunt Fiona agree, I'd be honored to show you my horses," Quinn replied. "In fact, I was just about to invite both of you to visit the Double H Ranch." Mrs. Peterson's pointed throat clearing reminded them they were in a library. After Emma's book was properly recorded in the lending ledger, they stepped outside into the autumn sunshine. "I was serious about the invitation," Quinn said as they walked toward the mercantile. "The ranch isn't as grand as some, but I'm proud of what I've built." "I'd like to see it," Fiona replied honestly. "And Emma would love to see the horses. Perhaps this weekend. I could send a buckboard for you, or you could ride over with Thomas if he's willing." The idea of visiting Quinn's ranch filled Fiona with anticipation. "I'll speak with Thomas about it." They reached the mercantile just as Thomas was emerging, his errands complete. He nodded to Quinn, no hint of awkwardness in his manner despite the changed circumstances. "Got everything squared away with Jameson," Thomas said, referring to the lawyer. "Land's officially yours now, Harrington." "Appreciate the fair dealing," Quinn replied. "I've just invited Miss Barrett and Emma to visit the Double H sometime. To see the horses," he added, with a nod to the excited child. Thomas considered this. "No reason they couldn't go. I've got that broken fence line to fix on Saturday, could drop them at your place on my way to get supplies." And so it was arranged. Fiona tried to temper her excitement in the days leading up to the visit, reminding herself that Quinn's interest might be merely friendly. Yet she couldn't deny the connection she felt with him, the way her spirits lifted at the thought of seeing him again. Saturday dawned clear and cool. Fiona dressed with care in her navy blue skirt and a cream shirtwaist that Sarah had always said complimented her coloring. Emma was equally excited, barely able to sit still for breakfast in her eagerness to see the horses. The ride to the Double H took nearly an hour. As they crested a hill, the ranch came into view below a sprawling property with a handsome main house, several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that had turned golden with the season. "It's beautiful," Fiona murmured. Thomas nodded agreement. "Harrington's done well for himself. Started with nothing 10 years ago." Quinn must have heard their wagon approaching, for he emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard. He was dressed in work clothes, denim pants, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a well-worn hat, but he'd clearly made an effort to be presentable. "Welcome to the Double H," he called, striding over to help Fiona down from the wagon. His hands were warm and strong as they circled her waist, lifting her easily to the ground. Fiona was acutely aware of his touch, brief though it was, and the smile in his eyes as he set her down. Emma could barely contain herself, bouncing on the wagon seat until Thomas helped her down. "Can we see the horses now, Mr. Harrington? Please?" Quinn laughed. "First things first, Miss Emma. Let's get you and your aunt settled, and then I'll show you the whole ranch." Thomas declined the invitation to stay, citing the work waiting for him. "I'll be back for them around supper time," he said, and with a nod to Fiona and a kiss for Emma, he was gone, the wagon rattling back down the drive. Quinn's home was a pleasant surprise, larger than Thomas's house, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Inside, the rooms were simply but comfortably furnished, with touches that spoke of care and attention: colorful woven rugs, bookshelves filled with volumes, a piano in one corner of the main room. "My mother taught piano," Quinn explained, following Fiona's gaze. "I had that brought out from Denver last year. Can't play a note myself, but it reminds me of her." There was no feminine touch to the house, but it was clean and well kept. "Do you manage all this yourself?" Fiona asked, gesturing to include the house and ranch. "I have a couple of hands who help with the cattle and horses," Quinn replied. "And Mrs. Alvarez comes in twice a week from town to clean and do laundry. But mostly, yes, I've grown used to my own company." "It's a lovely home," Fiona said sincerely. Quinn's expression softened. "It's meant to be a family home, just been waiting for the right family." Before Fiona could respond to this loaded statement, Emma tugged insistently at Quinn's sleeve. "Horses now, you promised," Quinn laughed. "So I did, Miss Impatience. Let's go see those horses." The tour of the ranch was thorough, with Quinn showing obvious pride in what he'd built. The horse operation was clearly his passion. He bred and trained quality mounts for both work and pleasure riding, selling to ranchers throughout the territory. "This is Monarch," Quinn said as they approached a magnificent black stallion in a separate paddock. "He's my prize stud. Brought him all the way from Kentucky 5 years ago." Emma was wide-eyed with admiration. "He's beautiful. He knows it too," Quinn chuckled. "Vainest horse I've ever met." Fiona watched as Quinn showed Emma how to approach the horse properly, offering an apple on a flat palm. The stallion's lips tickled Emma's hand as he took the treat, making the child giggle with delight. "Your turn," Quinn said to Fiona, offering her an apple. Monarch was intimidatingly large up close, his dark eyes intelligent as he assessed Fiona. She held out the apple as Quinn had shown Emma, trying not to flinch as the horse's massive head lowered toward her hand. "He won't hurt you," Quinn said softly, his hand coming to rest at the small of her back. "Just stand steady." The warmth of his touch was distracting, but Fiona managed to hold still as Monarch delicately took the apple from her palm. When she looked up, Quinn was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You're a natural," he said, his voice lower than before. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility, until Emma's excited call from the next paddock broke the spell. "Look." Baby horses. The rest of the morning and early afternoon passed pleasantly as Quinn showed them the entire operation: the cattle herd, the vegetable garden, the orchard he'd planted 3 years ago that was just beginning to bear fruit. Lunch was a simple but delicious affair of cold chicken, bread, and apple pie that Mrs. Alvarez had left the day before. After the meal, Emma's energy finally flagged, and she fell asleep on the sofa while looking at a picture book Quinn had produced from his shelves. With the child napping, Fiona and Quinn moved to the porch where the autumn sunshine provided comfortable warmth. "She's a wonderful child," Quinn remarked, watching Fiona through the window. "You're good with her." "She makes it easy," Fiona replied. "She's so much like Sarah, the same curiosity, the same openness." Quinn nodded, then seemed to gather his courage. "Fiona, I hope you don't mind my asking, but what will you do now, since the wedding is off?" "For now, I'll stay at Thomas's ranch as Emma's aunt and helper," Fiona explained. "Beyond that, I'm not certain. I've never had much opportunity to choose my own path." "And if you could choose, what would you want?" The directness of his question made Fiona pause. What did she want? For so long her life had been shaped by obligation and others' expectations. The idea of choosing for herself was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I'd want a purpose," she said finally, "something meaningful. And—" she hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Someone to share it with, a true partnership, not just an arrangement of convenience." Quinn's eyes held hers. "I felt something the moment I saw you stumbling off that stagecoach," he said quietly. "Something I haven't felt in a very long time, maybe ever." Fiona's heart raced at his words. "I felt it too," she admitted, "but I was promised to Thomas and I couldn't, I know." Quinn moved closer, taking her hand in his. "And I respected that, even as it drove me half mad, when Thomas told me the wedding was off." He shook his head, a smile touching his lips. "I had to stop myself from riding straight to his ranch that very moment." "What stopped you?" Fiona asked, hardly daring to breathe. "I didn't want to presume. You've had your life arranged for you enough already. I wanted any choice to be truly yours." Quinn's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers through her. "I'm not a perfect man, Fiona. I've made my share of mistakes, but I promise you this: I would never see you as just a convenient arrangement. From the moment I met you, you've been anything but convenient to my peace of mind." A laugh bubbled up in Fiona's throat at his wry admission. "Is that supposed to be flattering?" "It's supposed to be honest," Quinn replied, his smile deepening. "I find myself thinking about you at the most inconvenient times when I should be focusing on ranch accounts or mending fences or breaking horses. Instead, I'm wondering what you're doing, or what you'd think of the sunset, or how your hair might look in the morning light." The poetry of his words touched Fiona deeply. No one had ever spoken to her this way, as if she were something precious, something to be cherished rather than merely useful. "I think about you too," she confessed. "More than is proper, certainly." "Proper be damned," Quinn murmured, lifting her hand to his lips. "We're in the wilderness, Fiona. We make our own rules here." His lips against her skin sent a warmth spiraling through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. Fiona knew she should pull away, maintain some semblance of propriety, but she found herself leaning toward him instead. Quinn's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as he searched her eyes for permission. When she didn't pull away, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and questioning. It was nothing like Fiona had imagined her first kiss would be, not that she'd had much occasion to imagine it in recent years. Quinn's lips were warm and firm against hers, his hand at her waist steadying rather than constraining. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I've wanted to do that since White Rock Creek," he admitted, his voice rough. "I'm glad you waited until now," Fiona replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "It would have complicated matters considerably." Quinn laughed, the sound warming her further. Fiona Barrett, you are unlike any woman I've ever met. I hope that's a compliment, she teased, feeling suddenly lighter than she had in years. The highest, Quinn assured her, taking both her hands in his. Fiona, I know this is sudden. We've known each other barely 2 weeks. But I've lived long enough to recognize what matters. What I feel for you is real, and I believe what you feel for me is too. I'm not asking for promises yet, but I am asking for a chance. A chance to court you properly, to see if what's begun between us might grow into something lasting. The earnestness in his expression moved Fiona deeply. This was no arrangement of convenience, no practical solution to practical problems. This was a man offering his heart, asking for hers in return. I would like that very much, she said softly. The smile that broke across Quinn's face was like sunrise after a long night. He might have kissed her again, but a small voice from the doorway interrupted the moment. Aunt Fiona, Mr. Harrington, are you getting married? Emma stood there rubbing sleep from her eyes, her expression curious rather than troubled. Quinn recovered first, kneeling to the child's level. Not yet, Miss Emma, but I've asked your aunt if I might court her, and she's agreed. Do you know what that means? Emma nodded seriously. It means you want to see if you love each other enough to get married someday, like in my storybook. That's exactly right, Quinn affirmed, glancing up at Fiona with warmth in his eyes. Very clever of you to understand. If you marry Aunt Fiona, will she still be my aunt? Emma asked, the practical concern of a child. Of course I will, Fiona assured her, kneeling beside Quinn. Nothing would change that. Emma considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied. Good. And will I still get to see the horses? Quinn laughed. Anytime you like, Miss Emma. In fact, would you like to ride one before you go home today? Emma's eyes widened with excitement. Really? My own self, with me holding on, Quinn clarified. But yes, your own self. The rest of the afternoon passed in a glow of happiness for Fiona. Watching Quinn with Emma, his patience as he helped her onto the gentlest mare in his stable, his careful attention to her safety, while still allowing her the thrill of the experience, only confirmed what her heart already knew. This was a good man, a man who could be trusted with not just her future, but Emma's as well. When Thomas's wagon appeared on the horizon, Fiona felt a pang of regret that the day was ending. Quinn must have felt it too, for he took her hand as they waited for Thomas to arrive. Come again next weekend, he said. Both of you. I'll speak to Thomas about it. I'd like that, Fiona replied, squeezing his hand. Thomas seemed unsurprised when Quinn asked permission to court Fiona officially. If anything, there was relief in his expression as he nodded agreement. Seems right, he said simply. Sarah would approve, I think. On the ride home, Emma chattered excitedly about her horse ride, while Fiona's thoughts remained with Quinn and the kiss they'd shared. It wasn't until they were nearly home that Thomas spoke directly to her. You deserve happiness, Fiona, he said, his eyes on the road ahead. So does Harrington. Don't let Sarah's memory hold you back. Tears pricked Fiona's eyes at his generosity. Thank you, Thomas. I think she'd want all of us to find peace in our own ways. Thomas nodded, a small smile touching his lips. She always did know better than the rest of us what was good for us. In the weeks that followed, a new pattern emerged. Quinn courted Fiona with an old-fashioned formality that touched her deeply, riding over for Sunday dinners at Thomas's ranch, taking Fiona and Emma on picnics by Willow Creek, bringing small gifts that showed his thoughtfulness. A book of poetry she'd mentioned enjoying. A shawl in a blue that matched her eyes. A carved wooden horse for Emma to match the one he'd given Fiona. Thomas observed their growing attachment with quiet approval. He was healing in his own way, the sharp edges of grief softening as autumn deepened toward winter. Having Fiona there to care for Emma and the household freed him to focus on the ranch, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he began to make plans for the future. As the first snow dusted the Montana hills, Quinn invited Fiona, Emma, and Thomas to the Double H for Thanksgiving dinner. Mrs. Alvarez had prepared a feast, and Quinn had invited his ranch hands and several neighbors as well, making it a true celebration. After dinner, while the others were engaged in conversation or games, Quinn drew Fiona aside to the quiet of his study. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "I have something for you," Quinn said, reaching into his desk drawer. He withdrew a small box, and Fiona's heart skipped a beat. "Quinn, open it," he urged gently. Inside the box lay a ring, a simple but elegant design with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," Quinn explained. "My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together, to build a new life." Fiona looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "It's beautiful." Quinn took her hands in his. "Fiona Barrett, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here we learn quickly what matters, and you matter to me more than anything in this world. I love your strength, your kindness, your gentle heart. I love the way you are with Emma, the way you've built a life here despite all the reasons you might have turned back. I love you, Fiona, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." He knelt before her, still holding her hands. "Will you marry me? Not out of duty or obligation, but because you choose to. Because you want to build a life together as partners and equals." Tears spilled down Fiona's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Quinn, I love you too." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. His kiss was different now, not questioning but certain, filled with promise and passion and a future unfolding before them. When they returned to the main room, hand in hand, Emma was the first to notice the ring. "Are you getting married now?" she asked excitedly. "Yes, sweetheart," Fiona confirmed. "Mr. Harrington has asked me to be his wife, and I've said yes." A cheer went up from the assembled guests. Thomas stepped forward to shake Quinn's hand and kiss Fiona's cheek. "Congratulations to you both," he said sincerely. "It's what Sarah would have wanted." The wedding took place on Christmas Eve in the small church in Montana City. Snow fell gently outside, transforming the world into a glistening wonderland. Fiona wore a dress of deep blue velvet, with Sarah's lace veil and a bouquet of winter greenery. Quinn, handsome in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. Emma, serving as flower girl, beamed with pride in her new dress. Thomas stood as Quinn's best man, a testament to the friendship that had grown between the two men. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fiona felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that she had never expected to find so far from where her journey had begun. The reception was held at the Double H, the house decked in evergreens and red ribbons for both Christmas and the wedding. As Quinn led Fiona in their first dance, he pulled her close, whispering in her ear. "When you first stepped off that stagecoach, I never imagined we'd end up here," he said, his eyes filled with love. "But I thank God every day that you did." "Even though it seemed wrong at the time," Fiona teased, recalling his first reaction to her planned marriage to Thomas. Quinn laughed. "Especially because it seemed wrong. Some things are meant to be, Mrs. Harrington. And you and I, we were definitely meant to be." As midnight approached, the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds to begin their life together. Thomas had taken Emma home, promising to bring her to Christmas dinner the next day. Standing in the doorway of what was now their home, Quinn swept Fiona into his arms. "Welcome home, wife," he said, carrying her across the threshold. "Home," Fiona repeated, the word filled with meaning it had never held before. I think I've been looking for home my whole life without knowing it. And I've been waiting for you without knowing it, Quinn replied, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Sarah once told me everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. I didn't understand what she meant then. And now I know she was right. This is our second chance, Fiona, and I intend to make every day count. As snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, Quinn and Fiona began their new life together not from obligation or convenience, but from love freely given and joyfully received. The journey that had begun with Fiona traveling to marry her sister's widower had led her instead to the arms of a man who loved her for herself, and to a happiness greater than she had ever dared to dream. Spring came to the Montana territory in a riot of wildflowers, just as Quinn had promised. The Double H flourished under their joint care, Fiona bringing her organizational skills and fresh perspective, Quinn continuing to build the ranch he'd started a decade before. Emma visited often, dividing her time between her father's ranch and her aunt and uncle's home, growing strong and happy with the love of all three adults. By summer, Fiona had news of her own to share. As they sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson, she took Quinn's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We'll need to prepare the nursery," she said softly. "By winter, there will be one more Harrington at the Double H." The joy that broke across Quinn's face was a sight Fiona knew she would cherish forever. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying what words could not: gratitude, love, and the promise of a future brighter than either could have imagined, when fate first brought them together on a dusty stagecoach platform. Their son, James Thomas Harrington, was born on a snowy December night, almost exactly a year after their wedding. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his first cry it was clear he would have the strength of both. As Fiona held her son with Quinn beside her, Emma leaning over to examine her new cousin with fascination, she thought of Sarah. There was sadness still in the memory of her sister, but now it was tempered with gratitude. Sarah's final request had set Fiona on this path, though neither could have foreseen where it would lead. "She knew," Quinn said softly, seeming to read her thoughts as he often did now. "Maybe not exactly how, but she knew you needed to come west, that we all needed you." Fiona nodded, tears of joy mingling with those of remembrance. "To new beginnings," she whispered, looking down at their son. "And to the journey that brought us here," Quinn added, kissing her brow. "Every step of it." Outside, snow fell on the Montana hills, covering the land in a blanket of white that promised renewal when spring returned. Inside, the Harrington family, born of unexpected journeys and choices made from love, rather than obligation, began a new chapter in a story that would continue for generations to come.